Hello, I'm Kevin,
And I'm Jackson,
and this is A Disciple.
and a doubter.
So, today, all you lovely viewers, we will be continuing our conversation from last episode, which we're
You
discussing
forgot to
free will.
pray.
I don't know what you just said, but I'm sure it was something cool. So,
You
before
forgot to
we
pray.
begin, I was about to say, before we begin,
Oh, okay.
we'll start with a prayer. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Holy Spirit, come, breathe your life into us. Dispel any darkness in our hearts and minds as we make space for your word. Our Lady, Seat of Wisdom, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So, to rehash for all of you lazy bums who are skipping part 2 and decided not to listen to part 1, we discussed, as I mentioned, we discussed free will and what exactly that entails, and we discussed some arguments against the existence of free will. So, to kind of give you a sense of where we left off, we agreed upon the fact that free will itself is basically the idea that we have our own personal agency to act in a way such that we could have chosen to act in a different way if we so desired. And we discussed some scientific arguments against free will, which really stem from this understanding of physics called determinism, which is basically that everything, according to the laws of physics, is guaranteed to have a certain outcome based on knowable causes and factors. And some have used this line of reasoning to say that we don't actually have free will. I won't really fully explain it in more detail than that because you could just listen to the previous episode. But then we also discussed a moral argument against free will, which you want to quickly rehash what that was all about?
Yeah, so the idea there is basically that we can't explain. I don't think we can explain why some people do good and some people do evil, some people do bad in a way other than by citing either the circumstances of these individuals or their biological and neurological makeup, or if you are a religious believer of some sort, then citing the nature of their souls. But we I suppose we can, we were talking about Cain and Abel, and we said, okay, if we say that all of Cain and Abel's circumstances were equal and that their kind of internal composition was also the same, uh, and that their state of soul was the same as well. Like God didn't create Abel's soul to be inherently better than Cain's. If we assume all those things, then it, it's hard to figure out how or why Abel would have chosen to do good and Cain would have chosen to do evil. Um,
So
but
I did do a little bit of thinking. Sorry, complete the
no,
thought.
no, 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 it's fine. I'm not explaining it super well. We can honestly, I think we should just jump into it.
All right, so I did do a
People
little
can
bit of
just go
thinking
back
about
and
this
listen
today.
to part one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as I was thinking about this. Is it fair to say that we do whatever we. Is it fair to say that we do whatever we desire? So, to elaborate, if I desire to. Sorry, so. Let me think. If I eat a chocolate chip cookie, then I think it's clear that I had a desire to eat that chocolate chip cookie.
Yes.
And if I take a bullet for a friend, it's a little more complicated, I suppose. But I think all things considered, if I made that choice to take the bullet for my friend,
Yeah.
it means that I desired to do that action because I
Save your
saw I
friend's
saw
life.
to it that the good that would come out of that would outweigh the bad. So I think this gets a little bit into the discussion of lower will versus upper will, which I don't think I'll explain right now. I want to kind of go back to what I was saying about the fact that we do whatever we desire ultimately. So there's a philosophical question that a lot of people have thought about over the ages, which is, given that we do what we desire, if we don't necessarily have a say over what it is that we desire, then do we really have freedom? And I actually remember reading plenty of articles about this, like freshman year in philosophy class, basically saying that if our desires are entirely external, like what we choose to do with our lives, or what we desire to do with our lives, obviously informs what we do with our lives. If the desires themselves we don't have control over, does that mean we have true, genuine freedom? Now,
This is
plenty
like
of
the
people. This is like the what?
this is like the Schopenhauer quote. You can do what you will, but you can't will what you will.
Yeah,
If you
that's
substitute,
basically what I'm
yeah,
getting
if
at.
you substitute desire there, you can do what you desire, but you can't freely will what you desire. I think that's the idea
Yeah.
of it.
No, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but that is kind of the idea which I'm trying to articulate.
Yeah.
Now, let's take. No, I think it will be helpful to briefly to add into this discussion the difference between lower will and upper will, which I know we've talked about it literally 10 times in this podcast, but for those of you who don't know, the traditional Christian understanding of our free will is that we have the lower will, which is essentially the earthly desires of the flesh. That would be the part of you that just wants to sit around, watch TV all day while eating a million chocolate chip cookies and doing nothing else other than just appeasing your base appetites. This is also, I believe, it's referred to as as the love of concupiscence, basically just willing your own like fleshly, like satisfying your own fleshly desires, basically. Whereas the higher will is the will that says no, just giving in to all your base passions is actually harmful for you in the long run. And therefore you shouldn't live your life in such a way that you sacrifice your future to appease your fleeting hedonic whims of the moment. So that would say get up off the couch, put down the cookies, pick up a salad or something, or go for a run. The higher will is the one that is it's the will of self-denial, sacrificing the present for the good of the future, essentially. And again, the traditional Christian way of understanding this distinction is that the lower will is purely that of the flesh. It's attached to the earth. It doesn't contain any recourse to transcendental heavenly realities. Whereas the higher will mediates between the divine will of God, which is perfection, and the lower will, which is attached to the earth. Whereas obviously none of us act, because we do have a fallen nature. You could call that, so in a way you could call our lower will a symptom of our fallenness as human beings. It's not possible in this world that our higher will be completely aligned with that of God's will. Another way of saying that is it's not possible that we'll be perfect human beings, or that we'll always choose to do the best possible thing with our lives. However, we're not just slaves to our lower will. We do have this part of us that constantly nags at us, trying to get us to act in accord with what's genuinely conducive to our flourishing. And connecting this, I know I've been rambling on for like 5 minutes here, but connecting this back to Cain and Abel, we were discussing why is it exactly that Abel chose to do good, to act in a way that's pleasing to God, and Cain chose to do evil. His sacrifices to God were considered displeasing. I think and then it kind of goes back to what we were talking about yesterday, where one might argue that their circumstances were different, such that Abel was
More predisposed to do something good.
was more predisposed to do something good because he received these. Maybe he grew up in a more loving environment, let's say. And I know they're
Right.
brothers, but let's just take let's veer away from Cain and Abel for 1 second. Just like take two people. One person, John Smith, grew up in a loving environment. Another person, John
Doe.
Doe, was abused as a
Created.
child. Yeah,
Yeah.
John Doe was abused as a child, and he grows up to be a child molester, let's say, or a murderer, or name any brand of evil person. And John Smith grows up to be a loving father who everyone really appreciates. So you could say some people may argue that because their circumstances varied, therefore they
That
didn't
explains
truly.
that
That
explains the
explains
difference
the
in their
difference.
behavior rather than free will.
Exactly. So by that reasoning, it's almost excusable that if it is true that their circumstance is the sole reason that they had different outcomes with their lives, aka that they grew up to have different desires that caused them to act differently, then it would almost be excusable. Then the evil that John Doe does is almost excusable, and we perhaps shouldn't even punish people like that because it's not their fault. They didn't really have freedom. Now, on a gut level, most people would say no, we should still punish people like John Doe, and even because I think we all have a sense. We all kind of know that there are people who grew up in terrible environments. They were just surrounded by, let's say, another person. Joseph Doe was abused as a child, but he grows up to be a loving father. Like, it is possible that just because you had a traumatic childhood, it's not guaranteed that you're going to. It's not guaranteed that you're going to grow up to become a monster yourself. And I think we could even imagine a hypothetical, let's say, kind of like how we started off. Let's just imagine a hypothetical where two people have the exact same circumstances and they end up veering in different directions.
Yeah.
Now, one does good, one does evil. That's kind of the way you pose this Cain and Abel distinction. Now, that may cause one to think to themselves, all right, if it's not circumstances that dictate a person's desires and how they ultimately choose to act, could it just be God created them? Could it just be that God created them in such a way that one person had an inherently better soul?
Yeah.
Or could it be that God willed this person to be evil, in a sense? And I would argue, as I started to argue yesterday, I would say, and the reason I explained the distinction between the lower will and the higher will versus the divine will is because I think it will help kind of allow us to further think about this. As I argued yesterday, I don't think it's, by definition, I don't think it's possible that God could have willed Cain to act in a way that's displeasing to God. That seems kind of like an oxymoron. Like if something is displeasing to God, I don't know exactly how it phrases it in the Bible, but it says something along the lines of Cain's sacrifice did not please the Lord.
Yeah.
So just logically, if God willed that Cain acted in a way that displeases him, that just doesn't make sense, because if God wills something, then it would mean that God desired that thing to happen, and therefore, if he desired Cain to act this way, then Cain's sacrifice would not have been displeasing to God. So I think the way that I was thinking about this, the way that I could kind of allow this to make sense, is I think we really just have to examine kind of go back to examining the lower will, higher will distinction, in that because Cain must have had a greater love of concupiscence, I believe that's the right word. Like his lower will had a
God, that's like the most complicated word. What about? I mean, is that like a theological term? Just a greater love of
yeah, it
worldly
is
things.
a
Is
love of
that
concupiscence.
okay? Consupi,
I
concupiscence.
could be pronouncing that wrong.
Did you say? I feel like you said concupiscence the first time. Is that a word?
Concupiscence.
Concupiscence.
Is that not what I just said?
I don't.
I don't know.
I don't know what the
Concupiscence, I
hell.
believe, is the word. But yeah, so Cain must have had a greater love of concupiscence. Like he was more
It looks.
dictated. Cain allowed his lower will to dictate. Cain allowed his lower will to dictate his actions more so than he allowed his higher will to dictate his actions. In other words, he wasn't willing to make the proper sacrifices with the future in mind that his higher will would have dictated him to do so. And I would say the reason I don't believe this is God's fault, firstly, like I said, I think it's illogical to say that God would will something that's displeasing to him. But even perhaps a little bit more fundamentally than just looking at semantics, I think I think Cain, what was I saying? I think Cain is. I think we really have to examine the nature of our fallenness and the fact that Cain did have a choice to abide by his higher will, whereas Abel. Actually, this is the point I was trying to make
Okay.
before I lost my thought there for a second.
Okay.
Both Cain and Abel did have. They did. The reason I don't think it's unjust that Cain acted as he did, and the reason I don't think it's God's fault, is because Cain did still have a higher will. He did still have recourse to this divine will.
Right. I see.
He just chose to not abide by it.
Okay.
And that's even in the story itself.
Yes.
Is God essentially says to Cain, like, hey, look, this is your fault. You're not willing to make you've thus far been unwilling to make the proper sacrifices. However, you can change your ways. I believe God does say this to Cain. He affirms the fact that Cain doesn't have to act in this evil way that's displeasing to God. He can change his ways. Although it says that sin lays awake outside of Cain's door like a sexually aroused predatory animal, which I think by that analogy is almost saying that sin kind of naturally breeds sin in someone's life. Whereas, for instance, we all kind of just know this from personal experience. If you let sleep past your alarm one morning because you're lazy, and then you decide to scroll on Instagram, you're committing the sin of sloth, then that breeds the sin of lust because there's a good chance you're now in the mode of abiding by your love of concupiscence. You're now in the mode of abiding by your lower will in rejection to your higher will. And then it's much more likely that you're going to go like to Pornhub and jerk off or something by the fact that you first committed the sin of sloth. So I think the point there is kind of showing the snowball effect of vice. And so I guess really to put a bow on this extremely long 15-minute rant that I've been going on, I would say that Cain did in fact, by his human nature, did have a higher will, which naturally has recourse to the divine will because God implants the truth in all of our hearts.
Okay.
But he chose to abide by his love of concupiscence nonetheless. And because sin necessarily has a snowball effect, he was in a way raped by his sin, which bred deeper sin within him, causing him to lash out in rejection by his envy of his brother Abel and ultimately murder him. Whereas God did tell him, though, he doesn't have to go down this path. He can change his ways.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That might have just been the record monologue.
No, there was one in the first episode that was like 23 minutes, right?
Oh yeah, you did have another long one.
Yeah.
That's okay. That was fascinating. And I have a lot to say in response.
All right, go ahead.
And I hope that I can get my thoughts straight. I think I want to talk about the lower will and higher will thing because I think this is interesting. So, okay, Cain and Abel both have a lower will and a higher will, and they're both influenced by both of these wills.
Yeah, and we all just know this from personal experience.
Yeah.
We all know that
Yes.
we have desires. Yeah.
I think you've established that. But so your idea, or the point you're making is that Abel chooses to listen to his higher will, more so than Cain does. Cain goes against his higher will for the sake of his lower will. And this is a free decision. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So here's how I'm thinking about this. What we can't explain is why Cain makes the choice to go against his higher will, whereas Abel does not. Now, we could explain this circumstantially, like we've talked about throughout the course of the past 2 episodes. So, okay, if Cain is for whatever reason predisposed to doing bad things, then it makes sense why he is going to reject the higher will in favor of the lower will. But there's no freedom there. But this is why I had us say all circumstances are equal in the last episode. Because if all circumstances are equal, then we can ask ourselves, why does one individual like, okay, I want to talk about this with the language that you used. So you said God.
Bro, get the mic back.
Sorry. It's annoying to hold it. Okay. So you said God plants the truth in all of our hearts. This is kind of a callback to St. Paul when St. Paul says the truth is written on the hearts of all men, whether or not they are Jews. So okay. If this is indeed true, that we all kind of internally have an understanding of truth, of what is right, of how we should live our lives, even if we haven't been exposed to the Bible or exposed to Christianity or exposed to good moral teaching in an explicit way. But even if we haven't had exposure to any of those things, right? St. Paul says, and you said, God has planted the truth in all of our hearts. And so my question is, circumstances aside, why does one person choose to reject this truth or go against this truth, whereas another person chooses to accept it and live in accordance with it? Because, like, just think about it from your own perspective. Like, you would never go against something, you would never act against something that you knew to be true and good. So, like, if you knew that being a selfless person, if you had an understanding that being a selfless person was a really good thing, if you truly had that understanding, then you would try your best to be a selfless person. And sometimes, yes, you may come up short, but you wouldn't. It would be ridiculous to think that you would say, okay, I know that it is true that being a selfless person is good, but I am going to actively go against that truth because I am a wicked and spiteful individual and I hate God. And yeah, I don't want I want to be selfish. No, nobody would do that, right? Nobody does that.
Well, I wouldn't say. I wouldn't. I guess I would disagree with that. Like I would say, we can know things that like we can have a sense of what we think we should be doing. In fact, we can be very confident that we should do something
Yeah,
and
that's
still
true.
choose not to do it anyway.
You're right.
Like I would say that's not only
Okay, yeah,
that's
but
an
I want
extremely
to.
common experience. I would say.
Yes, I think so. I think this will be interesting to think about.
Just
So,
because I think we have such clouded intellects given our fallen human nature, which means we have the existence of our lower will.
no, you're right because like okay, like there's plenty of people who are like like an alcoholic. Let's say an alcoholic knows that, or most alcoholics know that they don't want to be drinking this much, but oftentimes they still choose to get really drunk because this is just the nature of human beings. We're very fallible, but
And we're fallible because we have our fallen will. We have that love of
yeah,
concupiscence.
yeah, I think fallen to use the language of fallen will is a Christian way of putting it and not a matter of fact, I would say. But okay, let's think about. Oh man, I need to get this thought back in my head because it was important. Um, I want to think about. Okay, so yeah, so two people, and okay, let's say that both of these individuals are struggling with pornography, and they both know that it's wrong, and they both desire to, uh, to
Not do
not
it.
be struggling with it. So, and then let's assume that one of them stops, and the other one continues to struggle. So in order for free will to exist, then the something must have happened where person A who chose to stop evaluated their choices and with the knowledge that pornography is bad and that they didn't want to continue consuming it, said to themselves, I am going to stop doing this. I'm sorry, I'm not explaining this as well as I want to be. So let me see if I can rephrase because I really want to lay this idea out.
I think I somewhat know where you're going, but I won't
Okay.
start speaking yet.
Okay. Thank you. So okay, you have. It's like if both person A and person B recognize this truth that pornography is bad, then we have to explain why person A chooses to quit and person B does not. And it's we can explain this. I think we can explain this circumstantially. Maybe person A didn't struggle as much as person B, or maybe person A just like inherently has a stronger will or something like that, or maybe person A had a better support system around him, something like that. But I don't think we can explain it in a way that allows for free will, because like if both of these individuals know this truth, both have an equal understanding of this truth, then it doesn't make any sense why one person would, you know, act in accord with this truth, and one person would act not in accord with this truth. Unless, of course, they don't exactly have an equal understanding of this truth. But if they don't have an equal understanding of the truth, then the difference in the way that they choose to act can't be attributed to free will, but rather to a difference in circumstances, material circumstances. Do you see? Kind of?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess the I guess the person who manages to quit pornography it's probably fair to say that he has a fuller grasp of the truth of just like he more innately senses the true genuine sexual love for which we're called as human beings and is therefore more likely to abide by his higher will in that sense, which understands the full picture of human sexuality more so than the person who remains an addict. And it's because of his greater understanding of this truth that he chooses to stop. Now,
Right.
to what you were saying about, does that mean there's a difference in free will? I guess it really comes down to the fact, does God give everyone sufficient? And I'm thinking, does God give everyone sufficient grace? I think Thomas Aquinas actually wrote about this topic. The fact that like some people do just kind of naturally, some people are more naturally touched by God.
Yeah.
But I think he still contends nonetheless that God gives people sufficient grace to ultimately know him. Like everyone, God gives sufficient grace to ultimately know him. And I think the way that an analogy, I don't know if it's his analogy or just a general analogy that exists within Christian literature, which kind of says that each person's soul can be represented by a cup, a chalice, let's say. And some people's chalices are just naturally larger than others, meaning they're capable of grasping and ultimately experiencing more of God's love than others. But nonetheless, if a person whose chalice is smaller compared to a person whose chalice is comparably larger, if the smaller chalice is filled to the brim, just completely filled with God's love, that person will be perfectly satisfied nonetheless. And therefore it's not something that we have to fret over, because God gives everyone, so even though some people have a greater capacity to experience God's love, everyone has the sufficient capacity necessary to maximize their own satisfaction to ultimately reach their ultimate end for which they are created. For instance, it's an idea in Catholic theology that God loves Mary more than any other creature. and Mary has a greater capacity than any of us other created human beings to experience God's love.
Yeah.
But that's not something that we don't have to have a jealousy of Mary, and we should not have a like. We should not be sinfully jealous of Mary because we can still fully attain the maximized satisfaction for which we're created. So, regarding someone who's more easily capable of quitting pornography because he is more easily able to have this full grasp of the true, genuine love for which he's created, which pornography would inhibit him from experiencing. I don't think it would be out of line with Catholic theology to say that that person, obviously there's more to it than just is someone more easily capable of quitting pornography, but in theory it wouldn't be out of line with Catholic theology to say that that person has a greater capacity to experience more of God's love, which in a way that might even sound a little icky, it could maybe be phrased that God loves some people more than others. However, the Catholic response would say that isn't something, again, that's not something we need to be sad over or think unjust because of the fact that everyone can ultimately receive ultimate satisfaction of all the desires they could ever ask for. And God does give people sufficient grace to make that choice.
Can I jump in here?
Mm-hmm.
I'm so. Would you think that like there would be examples where person A had was given more kind of was given from the jump, had more grace or more access to God than person B, but that person A still chose to reject God, whereas person B, who had less access to God, chose to accept God? Would you say there's examples of that? That is something that has happened.
Wait, sorry. You said the person with let's going back to the analogy. The person with the smaller chalice chooses to accept God, whereas the person with the bigger chalice chooses. I do think that could happen. Yes.
Okay, so my question would be, how do we explain calling upon free will? Why the person with the bigger chalice chooses to reject God. So, why would a person who, maybe they're born into a very religious family, or maybe they just have kind of a natural predisposition towards divine things, why would that person freely make a choice to turn away from God, to reject God? And then why would other individuals who inherit similar circumstances, who have sufficient grace, have a lot of access to the divine?
We'll say so equal chalice size.
Yeah. So okay, yeah. Why do other individuals with large chalices choose to accept God? So then, if ignoring circumstantial reasons, because those don't allow for free will, we have to then look to the state of these individual souls.
Mm-hmm.
So, if there is free will, and if, oh my gosh, these ideas are just too above me. But,
I know. Me too.
I really am just I just get lost.
I know. Me too.
But,
Bro.
okay. So I'm gonna draw this in my notebook so that I have a visual representation of what I'm talking about here. This will help me. So we have two chalices of equal size, and these chalices kind of represent our person A and person B's circumstances, and so
circumstances or Or just kind of nature
predisposition
of the
to
soul?
predisposition to the divine. Is that
Okay. Sure,
So-
sure.
which I think is kind of similar circumstance.
It is, yeah.
'Cause it's like out of their control, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
the cup, the chalice size that an individual inherits is out of that individual's control. I think in this
so.
analogy.
I think so. Yeah.
So, okay, then we have person A rejecting God, and person B accepting God. And they both have the same chalice size, so we can't say that person A rejected God because they had a smaller chalice. Because that's not what's going on here. They have the same size chalice. So then, okay, we have to look inward. We have to look to the state of these two individual souls. So, okay. There must be something about person A's soul which causes them to reject God, whereas there must be something different about person B's soul which causes them to accept God. But
And whether or not that thing is by choice of the person is the question of the hour.
right, because like in my mind, it's like, okay, if person A for some reason had a worse soul, then it makes total sense why that person rejects God. Because even though their chalice, which is a material thing which represents circumstances, was the same as person B's, their inward nature was worse, and so it makes sense why that person would reject God because they had a lesser inward nature. But of course, this explanation does not allow for there to be any free will, because even though it's not material circumstances acting on the individual or influencing the individual, it still factors outside of that person's control, that being their state of soul, which influenced their action. So then, okay, let's say, all right, person A and person B, they both have the same size chalice, and they both have the same content of soul. So, okay, these things are both equal. Now, we still have person A rejecting God and person B accepting God. And so, if there is to be free will, then there must be something going on inside each of these souls which causes these two people to act differently in spite of having the same size chalice and the same content of soul.
Because if they didn't have the same content of soul, then it wouldn't be free will.
Then it wouldn't be free will. And I don't know how we can possibly, like, we can't wrap our minds around what that thing might be.
Well, did you just get it there when you said wrap our minds? The thing could just be each person's mind.
I don't think that's. I mean, I think I might have gotten it in the sense that we might say, okay, the thing which, sorry, like maybe it's just the case that whatever allows for our freedom is so incomprehensible to us that we'll never understand it. That could be the case.
Okay, well, let me think. So the person they both have the same size, like the same natural, like innate understanding of God's love, and aka same chalice size.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I get the image. Oh, you're just holding it up there for our viewers. And we'd say, all right, well, maybe then there's a difference in their natures, their souls, but then that wouldn't really seem to make it free will. So, we know there is something there. to do it. Unless you just take the. I think we know there is something that compels people to act differently, or that causes people to act differently. And I guess
But it could be circumstance or state of soul. That's an important thing to say.
so. I guess you would say,
It's not necessarily a fact that, like when I was talking about that other thing which is present in the soul, which might allow for there to be free action, it's not necessarily the case that that thing exists. It could just be that the explanation for difference in human action is circumstance and is the nature of one's soul. There doesn't necessarily have to be that third missing thing which would allow for free will, but it might be there.
okay, well, if it was circumstance, that would almost just be going back to the determinism thing, basically, right?
Right. So then we move down to layer 2, which is state of soul, because that's immaterial. That's outside of the sequence
That's
of
outside of the sequence of like the laws of physics.
Uh-huh.
So but then if we say state of soul, then it would mean God created these people so that one would necessarily sin.
Yeah,
Like,
because
yeah.
if God creates everyone with the same state of soul, then we would expect that they would all act in the same way. They would all strive towards God, unless of course, circumstances could then explain difference in action.
Yeah, so let's move down the layer from circumstance and say that like physics can't explain everything. There
Okay.
has to be some sort of transcendental force
Uh-huh.
or immaterial force. And then we say, oh, so could God have created these people differently so that it was almost like guaranteed by God's will of the way by which he created these people that one person would choose to sin. And then I've argued that idea just kind of logically doesn't make sense because how could God will someone to do something that's displeasing to God? So then that leaves us with the third explanation, which is it's just free will. But so then the third explanation would be that it's not the fault of physics and it's not the fault of God that people choose to sin. It's the fault of us. But that answer is unsatisfying to you because you think that if everyone had, because you just can't seem to put your finger on exactly what causes one person to do good and another person to do bad if they both have the same truth written into their heart.
Yes, to make one point, based on the language you just used, because I think it's very helpful. It's easy for me to see how it might be the fault of physics that people act differently. It's also fairly easy for me to see how it could be the fault of God that people act differently, or the fault. You can use a synonym for God if you'd like, but like I was just describing, it's almost impossible. Well, it is impossible for me to see how difference in action might be explained as our fault and our fault alone.
Yeah,
And so because it's easy for me to wrap my mind around how it might be the fault of physics and the fault of God, but it's so hard for me to wrap my mind around how it could be our fault in full, then like this is why I'm very skeptical of the doctrine of free will, because it seems so incredibly difficult to prove, and yet it's the foundation of all of Catholic theology.
Yeah. So because of the fact that because I guess I'm just trying to rerun through this in my head again. For me, I don't think it's physics because I think the natural science only explains so much, and I don't think it's God's fault because, again, I think it's an oxymoron to say that God wills something that displeases him. And so then if I'm trying to explain that third thing, which the answer would be free will,
Yeah.
then how exactly could you explain the fact that we each have we each have the truth written into our heart. Like we each have the ability, if we are to accept that God did not create us, if we accept that God did not create us such that it was guaranteed that we would choose to reject him, then, which means we each have some semblance of the truth written into our hearts. And if we were to say that some people just have different degrees of truth written into our hearts, that would go back to it's circumstances that dictates, but I think that that's not the case. So, yeah, if two people have the exact same like innate grasp of the truth of God, why does one person reject it and one person does not? And then you start to consider the lower will, like the love of concupiscence. The fact that some people are unwilling to the fact that some people are so blinded by some people are so blinded by their love of concupiscence that they choose not to act in accord with this truth that's written into their heart.
But I think you're just falling into the trap of circumstances there. Unless you're
Yeah,
taking
yeah, I know. And then, because I see why you would say you're falling into the trap of circumstances there.
This is, I don't want to interrupt your train of thought. Uh, I think this is the point that I've been at in my own thinking on free will for maybe a month or so now. Like, I think it's possible that there is an explanation. I think that there could be an explanation for why two people with the same state of soul, the same size chalice, choose to act differently. But I think it's very hard to come up with what that explanation might be. But it seems like it could be out there. That being said, in my understanding, there is nobody in all of human history who has come up with this explanation. Because you remember I was talking about Aquinas last time, and I said there's a certain point where Aquinas stops, and he says, we simply must have faith that this thing called free will exists. And this is the point he stops at. So even Aquinas got stuck here, which is interesting.
I guess I'm kind of thinking to myself, like, I guess I'm convinced logically that it can't be circumstantial. Like the deterministic physics, laws of physics thing is, I'm convinced logically that it cannot be that. And I'm convinced logically that it cannot be God-willed people, that or some immaterial force for goodness willed people to sin. So I guess I'm kind of at the point of thinking, maybe similar to Aquinas, that it must be an act of free will. But I see what you're saying. Anytime like you really try to think about it from free will, it almost does seem to kind of get you back to one of the other two explanations. in that it makes you think like, oh, some person has a more innate grasp of truth, goodness, and beauty, or
I mean, that could be either circumstantial or
yeah,
statement.
like what is it that at the tipping point, what is the thing that causes like imagine a like razor edge that's perfectly like that's as sharp as could possibly be physically, and you have like a ball, or let's not even it's a one-dimensional razor edge that's as perfectly sharp as it could possibly be, and you have a perfectly round ball
Yeah.
sitting on top of this like razor thing, and it's perfectly balanced. Like, how are you going to? What is it exactly that determines how it's going to tip in one direction or another? And that's kind of why I'm not convinced that physics could explain this, and which is why I say there has to be some sort of immaterial cause.
Yeah, this is
And
oh man,
then,
Kevin, this is so good.
yeah.
This is such a good way to think of it. Sorry, keep going.
Mhm.
This is a fascinating way to conceptualize it.
And but that's why I think physics doesn't take you far enough because I don't think physics can explain which direction that ball is going to tip, and that's why I say there must be an immaterial cause.
Uh-huh.
And like I said, it doesn't make sense to say that God willed something that displeases God. And so I almost feel like by logical necessity, it has to be a free acting agent, namely a subjective person. And I guess I can grant that it's something. Well, not I guess I can grant that it's something we won't understand in this life. We certainly won't fully grasp it in this life.
Mhm.
But I think when you really look at it, like I said, when you try to explain, like what you were saying, when you try to explain the fact that like you have the innate understanding of God, you have the innate understanding of truth, goodness, and beauty versus like circumstances. Whenever you try to explain it, you kind of come back to the fact that again, we're just looking at this razor edge ball. Like I said, when you try to explain it, you fall back into the traps of
Either circumstance or
either circumstance, as we've established throughout this discussion.
yeah.
So then you necessarily come back to this razor edge with the ball sitting on top of it.
Uh-huh. And there must be
We
something.
don't know why, but there is a reason that ball tips one direction or the other. So I guess really the only conclusion we can draw is that is that free will does exist, or that the conclusion that I'm drawing personally from that, from the fact that the ball will tip, is that free will does exist, and we won't understand exactly how it operates, but we know that because it does tip, it can't be circumstances or God's will because that doesn't make any sense. It's an
I
oxymoron. So
I
I guess I'm
think
kind of at the point where I'm saying I can't explain it to you,
mhm.
but I just kind of know that free will does exist because that ball on the razor edge that's perfectly round, perfectly balanced will tip.
I think I would be very I think maybe we can wrap up this episode soon, but
Yeah.
I'm curious to investigate our second maybe contradiction that it can't be God's fault, or that it being God's fault would be an oxymoron because God, who is perfect goodness, can't be the cause of something which is not perfectly good.
Otherwise, he wouldn't be God.
Yes. I think I would be interested to investigate that idea further, because I don't find it totally convincing off the bat, but I'm unable to wrap my mind around it fully sitting here trying to think about all of these complex ideas. Um, this is very interesting. This is very, very interesting. Um,
Mm.
Now, one point that I wanted to make, and I'm curious what you think about this. Like I mentioned earlier, pretty much all of mainstream Christian theology, specifically Catholic, rests upon the doctrine of free will. Because free
Yeah,
will,
if you disprove free will, you basically disprove Christianity.
yeah, right, because free will is the explanation for the fall of man. Free will is the explanation for all of the evil
For
which
why we need
comes
a redeemer in the first place.
after the fall of man.
Mhm.
Uh, Free will basically makes it so God can still be a good God. Um,
Well, I don't know if I quite get that last point, but I think really what you're getting at is that if you
well, because
say
if
that,
there's no free will, then if there's no free will but God exists, then God would be the cause of the unfortunate. God would almost necessarily be the cause of the unfortunate things which we do.
okay,
And
yeah, sure,
if we also like if you believe in God and you believe in hell but you don't believe in free will, that means God is sending to people to hell, or people are
Mhm.
ending up in hell who didn't have the choice to end up anywhere else, which would then seem to make God.
So I guess the question that we would want to explore, we're not going to do it now because I know all you patient millions of viewers have been just dying for us to shut up. If you made it this far, we still appreciate you nonetheless. But I guess a question we could talk about is like, is it by necessity the definition of God that he is the highest possible conceivable good? Or could it be the case that God is actually not the highest possible conceivable good? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Well,
Like, do we know by necessity that God is good?
yeah, well, it is
And
so, yeah, because we understand God as the greatest conceivable thing, or maybe
yeah.
not even the greatest, the greatest possible thing. And so, I guess, must it necessarily be the case that the
That
goodness,
God doesn't will some people himself to sin,
like, could the greatest possible thing be the cause of
evil.
less less great things, less good things? Um,
I mean,
is
I
that
just, to
maybe
me, that just
possible?
doesn't, that wouldn't make logical sense because I guess evil is classically understood as the privation of the good. So just if we have, like, we judge,
But Kevin, yes, it doesn't make logical sense, but here's the thing. Evil exists. So fact number 1, evil exists. Uh
or lack, if we
Moral evil
understand evil as
exists.
a privation, then we would say sub-ideal goodness
Okay.
exists maybe.
Things that we call evil occur in the world, and
Or
some
things
of
that
those.
should be good are things that we conceive should be better are not as good as they should be.
No, I've never understood this idea of privation of goodness, but I'll sure if I'll grant you the language there. So there are things which are imperfect. Fair.
Mhm.
There are things
Yeah.
which are imperfect, and as I think basically the conclusion that we've reached this episode is that uh, we can't explain how that imperfection would be the result of our own human freedom. We might still think that it is, but we are unable to explain it, or at least you and I, and it seems like everyone else in human history who's thought about this has been unable to explain it. So, fact number 1, uh, there is imperfection in the world. Fact number 2, that imperfection cannot be explained, uh, citing our own free will. So,
Well, yeah, I guess you could. you could explain it by saying that it is this thing which isn't quite explainable.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that then makes me think it could be plausible then that the cause of that imperfection, if it's not our human freedom, which we can't explain, is the greatest possible thing which created all of this. I'm not saying that's necessarily the case, but it seems plausible in my mind based on those two facts that we have established here and now. But I think we should investigate it further because
Yeah, I'd like to know why. Because to me, it just doesn't. I'm pretty convinced that something that is the greatest possible good couldn't, because goodness itself is just a comparison, or all things kind of by definition, when we're judging the merits of a created thing, in a way we're just seeing how much does it reflect the nature of the greatest possible good. Like the concept of like form
Plato's
and
forms.
yeah, like Plato, I've had the like you have a master artist creates this sculpture, I think called like the form, and then lesser artists try to recreate it, and then you just judge the goodness of these
Yeah.
lesser artworks based on how it
Insofar
compares
as they,
relative
yeah.
to this greatest possible good. So I think we would say like all created things, the goodness of these things are just judged based on how much they reflect the greatest possible good. Like how much. So more colloquially, the goodness of a person is measured by how much they reflect God's nature. And so therefore, I would say if someone is acting evilly, if that's a word, if someone's acting in an evil fashion, then we judge the fact that it is evil by the fact that they're straying from God's nature, which, as established, is the greatest possible good. There's so many phrases that we just repeat over and over again, like greatest possible good. But so yeah, like to me, just definitionally, if we're judging by how much it deviates from the greatest possible good, I don't think the greatest possible good could like be the cause of that. Could like reflect that or cause that deviation.
Okay. So we're saying physics can't be the cause of imperfection in full, and neither can the greatest possible good. So then the only explanation left is that
personal
it's
agency.
something within us that causes imperfection.
And we can't fully and we could explain the effects of this, like we all understand the love of concupiscence, we all understand that we have desires to do bad things, but we can't necessarily fully grasp, as I think we've established, like we won't fully grasp why it is on like the grand scheme of God's providence that some people choose to reject the greatest possible good and some people choose to reflect it by the way they live.
Can I ask you something?
Uh,
Do you think that if you somehow became logically convinced that free will couldn't exist, let's imagine a world in which that somehow happened. Do you think that would you accept it? Or would you continue to maintain that free will existed even if you were logically convinced of its impossibility?
no, I wouldn't. If I was somehow logically convinced of its possibility, then I wouldn't.
Impossibility.
If I was logically convinced that free will could not possibly exist, I would not continue to hold. I would not continue to believe in free
Do
will.
not continue to believe in it.
But like I said, I think I am extremely convinced, I suppose, that free will. I am extremely convinced that free will does exist,
Before this conversation,
but I am willing to grant, like I said, that we won't be able to, that we can't fully explain it.
would you have supposed that free will, the existence of free will, was as difficult to explain or as difficult to grasp as we have now concluded that it is? Would you have supposed that before this conversation?
No, I think you've convinced me that it is more difficult to grasp. But in a way, it almost kind of makes me believe it a little bit more because it reaffirmed my belief in the fact that it can't be the other two explanations.
Mm-hmm.
But I still do believe the ball will move in one direction or another.
Right. Well, the ball
So,
necessarily does move if we're
yeah,
if we're
and we
assuming that
just
the
see
ball
that.
is like human action.
Yeah, exactly. So you've convinced me that free will is more difficult to grasp.
Uh-huh.
But in a way, like I said, that almost kind of deepens my faith because it makes me see like, man, like God is just so awesome that He's created us like this, and that we just can't fully understand the goodness of God's will.
Mm-hmm.
And it does make me more excited for heaven one day when I get to behold my Creator and think back to this conversation and say like, oh yeah, like I get it now. So
As Thomas Aquinas might say, it was all straw. It was all nothing in the end.
exactly.
This
For those who don't
conversation
know,
about whether or not
Thomas
free will
Aquinas did
exists.
have a vision of heaven. So Catholic story, so the Catholic understanding goes. And he was so his vision of heaven, like what
He was
he
so
read
floored
was
by
so
it.
wonderful, and he was so floored by it that this man who had written millions and millions of words in his life, explaining, trying his best to explain the nature of God, like he said it's all straw. Everything I've written is all straw in the end. And from that day forth, I believe he did not write a single thing until he passed and met his Creator face to face.
Is that true?
I'm pretty sure
I don't know if
he
that's
didn't
true.
write anything
Because he
else.
died on his way to advise the
He died like
Pope.
riding a horse or something.
I know he hit his head on a tree branch.
Yeah. Um, yeah, maybe that was it.
That was-
Anyway, folks, we appreciate you for listening. I hope that I stoked within you a greater desire to get to know your Creator, so you could one day explain free will to your fellow saints in heaven. And I hope that you employ your own rational faculties to act accordingly in a way that is in cooperation with God's grace, so that you can one day understand free will.
I have a question to leave our viewers with, if anyone has made it this far, which is, even if free will didn't exist, would it still be necessary to believe in it? So even if you became convinced, or even if you somehow learned for a fact that free will didn't exist, would it still be necessary to live our lives as if it did exist? I think this is an interesting thing to contemplate on. Another interesting question that I just thought of might be, do we look upon other people and their fallibility more charitably if we disbelieve free will? Am I more likely to act charitably towards the drug addict or towards the murderer if I don't believe that they have free will? This is another question that our viewers might ponder while you wait for our next episode to drop.
Mm-hmm. And I would like to just tack on there that even in this frame of questioning, we are kind of presuming a position of free will, asking the viewers to ponder these things, and also causing them to think about the fact that in light of these revelations, how would they choose to act?
That's
so free will is sort of woven by necessity into the discussion of free will. On that note, I think we probably should let people go because, like I said, they're itching for us to shut up right now. Until next time, folks.
Underestimate the profundity of this conversation. I think if anyone has listened to the end, they understand the profound nature of what has just been discussed over this last hour and 14 minutes. And if you have listened to the end, we are very, very grateful. And we hope that you are not a nihilistic free will denier at this point.
And I will use my free will going forth to continue praying for all of you. Please pray for me as well. Please pray for Jackson. Please also pray for the success of this podcast so that we could touch the hearts of more people. Thank you very much, everyone. Until next time. So
Have a good night.